All right, this is 9.5. It's called completing the square. This is another method of how to solve quadratic equations. Remember, we already talked about several different ways to solve a quadratic equation. We could simply graph it, factor it, and then we also talked about using the square root method. So just as a reminder, if I wanted to solve this equation, there's two ways to solve this, what we've learned so far, besides graphing. We could graph this as well, but we could also, we could take this equation and we could bring everything over to one side, set it equal to 0. And then we could factor this. So this is the second method that we learned. And then again, once you factor, you set both of these equal to 0. And then you solve it. And remember what these answers represent. They're called zeros. So if I did graph this, it would cross at 7 and cross at -1. Those are called x-intercepts, zeros or roots. And that's what those answers would be. The other way to do this is if I take this equation, another way to do this, besides graphing, besides factoring, is what I could do is I could factor this. Notice that's x minus 3, which is x minus 3 squared. And then once I get to this step, I can take, to get rid of that square, you can square root both sides. And so this is going to be x minus 3 equals plus or minus 4. And then you're going to add 3 to both sides. 3 plus 4 is 7. And then 3 minus 4 is -1. So we got the same answer, we just did it two different ways. And again, we could graph it if we wanted to. We would have to graph this step. Remember, once you solve it, set it equal to 0. You can come over to this and take in x squared minus 6x minus 7, and then actually push graph, and then you can see it crosses at -1 and it crosses at 7. So there's three ways to solve these problems that we've done so far. Now, completing the square, the reason why the completing the square is there is because there are some problems that when you get to this, like this, if we tried to factor this, you know what times what is positive 16 but adds together to give you 14, sometimes it can't factor. And then we could always graph it, but then you're going to get a decimal, and what if we're looking for the exact answer? And not a decimal answer, but the exact answer. So this is why completing the square comes in handy. So one of the first things we're going to do is, remember this is your A. If A is 1, and to use completing the square, A has to be 1. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take C to the other side. So on this problem, on this method, you actually don't want it to equal 0. You want it, you want the space here, and I'll show you why. I'm going to leave a space. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my, I'm going to add something to both sides of the equation. So I'm literally going to add something here. I'm going to add something here. That's really what I'm doing. And remember, what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So I'm going to add a certain number to both sides. Well, the way to find that number is we're going to take b divided by 2, and we're going to square it. So in this problem, b is -14. And -14 divided by 2 is 7, and 7 squared is 49. So 49 is what I'm going to add to both sides. Now, you might be asking, like, well, why are you doing that? Well, there's something that you notice on the left side. The left side, if I try to factor this, now it can be factored to x minus 7, x minus 7. And this can be written, notice they are identical, x minus 7, x minus 7. So that can be written as a perfect square. That's why this method is called completing the square. That's because those will match and you can write it as a square. And then to solve this, it's just like you're going to use the square root method, take the square root of both sides. And then you have x minus 7 equals plus or minus the square root of 33. and then you're going to add 7 to both sides. So the exact answer is this right here. So if you want to write that, like if you're typing this into Delta Math or some other program, this would be 7 plus the square root of 33, and then 7 minus the square root of 33. Those are the exact answers. Now, if we were wanting a decimal approximation, then we could just type in 7 plus the square root of 33, and then 7 minus the square root of 33. And those would be my 2 decimal answers to get to them. Now, one thing I do want to point out to you on this, just as a little hint, notice like this, like if you're having problems with factoring still, like you're not sure exactly what that will factor, notice this when you did b divided by 2, notice that is -7. Notice that right there, it's -7. And notice that's what I have in my parentheses. Hint, hint, that's a good suggestion to actually show this work over here, because it's going to help you in the factoring process as well. So that's how you do completing the square to get the exact answers. So let's look at a problem. If you remember, to use completing the square, A has to be 1, has to be 1. So on this problem, what we have to do first is we're going to divide everything by 4. So we're literally going to divide everything by 4. Remember, what you do to one side, you have to do the other side. So we're doing everything divided by 4. So this is now going to be x squared plus 3x minus 11 equals 0. And now we're going to do completing the square. So now we're going to add 11 to both sides. Leave a space. And then what we're going to do is we're going to find that magical number, you know, that number that we're going to add to both sides. And so we're going to take b divided by 2, and we're going to square it. So in this problem, b is 3. And then that's going to give us 9/4. So we're going to square it. So 9/4 is what I'm going to add to both sides. Now, as far as factoring this, you're like, oh, now I can't factor that. Remember, I gave you a hint on the last one. If you notice, if I go back to the last problem, notice it's the step right before you square it. That number on the inside is what's going to go in the parentheses. So on this problem, you know, the step right before you square it, 3/2, you know, that's actually the perfect square. So x plus 3/2. All right, on the right side, there's a couple ways to do this, but if you take 11 plus 9/4, and you get 13.25, or if you wanted to enter this as a fraction, you could do math, enter, and you can get 53/4. You know, there's a lot of advantages of doing it as a fraction because of the next step. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. And that's going to cancel out, you know, the square and the square root cross each other out. So I'm left with x plus 3/2. Plus or minus. Now, when you take the square root of a fraction, that's the same thing as taking the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom. So this is going to be the square root of 53 over 2. Remember, we're looking for the exact answer. And so that's what we're trying to aim for here. So now we're going to minus 3/2 minus 3/2. So -3/2 plus or minus the square root of 53/2. And if you wanted to, since they have a common denominator, you could actually combine this together to be one fraction if you wanted to. You better do it that way. So that would be one possible answer, or you can write it that way, either way. So again, if I was looking for, those are the exact answers. If I was looking for a decimal approximation, again, I'm going to do -3/2 plus, so you do the plus, and then the square root of 53. Make sure you go outside of the square root, and then divide by 2. That would give me one of the answers, and then I'm going to do second entry, that's like copy paste. Do the minus So those are going to be my two, if I was looking for decimal answers, 2.14 and negative 5.14 would be my decimal approximation to kind of do that. Now, one last thing is how to use completing the square to actually write something in vertex form. So remember what vertex form over here is? So we did vertex form a couple of sections ago. So if I want to write, this is standard form, y equals x squared minus 8x plus 11. But what if I want to get it into vertex form to actually find the vertex, to find the maximum height without using a graphing calculator to graph it whatsoever? So if I was wanting to do this, so your very first step in doing this is you're going to take the 11 over to the other side. And then you're going to use completing the square. So remember what we're going to do is take b divided by 2, square it. b is negative 8, it's right here. And divide that by 2, which is negative 4. And so 16 is what I'm going to add to both sides of the equation. So this is going to be y plus 5 over here, and this is going to factor to x minus 4 squared. Remember, the step right before you square it is the factor. And then all you have to do is minus 5 from both sides, and notice I have it in vertex form. So from here, you can, if I ask you what the vertex is, now you can say it's 4, negative 5. That's how to put it in vertex form.